In this Gold Belt video, I'm going to show how to deal with a web service that we're calling. So we're not building a web service, we're calling an existing web service. I'm going to use Python for this particular example, but this will work in any of the languages that we're using. I have the rich client application open. This is the train shipment scheduler, and I'm doing the add new because that's the one where we're adding a web service as a part of the Python code down here. What we basically need to do is set up our tests so that we can intercept those web services. So the web service call in reality will go to, in this case, midwesternfreight.com, which is not a real service. What we want to do is intercept that and make sure everything looks correct. So we're going to intercept those calls. We're going to make sure that the URL is coming back correctly, that the JSON is coming back correctly, and then we'll return something in a mocked way from the test. This will largely depend on the strategy pattern. So one of the patterns that we're learning as a part of the Gold Belt, the strategy pattern is going to be critical for getting this functionality to work correctly. In this solution, or in this project, I do already have a test. I've created a test, and you can see I'm using Qt-bot, so that's pytest-qt. That'll help automate a rich client application that'll show it and run it. This is using pyqt5 for the rich client application. All that's in main. We're going to get to that in a minute. So I've got this set up already. That's another video for another time to show how to use Qt-bot to automate our UI. But let's just go and run this, make sure I've got everything correctly set up. So this is pytest. I do have an error. I think this is related to main. Yeah, no module for train shipments from train ship in main py4. Perfect. Let's go ahead and fix that. So this needs to be app.trainshipments. Back to our test. All right, now we should be able to run this. It'll take just a couple seconds because it has a timeout on the database connection. It's going to load up the application, show it really fast, and close. So all of that's working correctly. At this point, what we want to do is we want to mock out the web service. So I'm going to get everything set up. This is kind of starting you down the path, but I want you to see how we're going to run through this and design through this code. So starting off, there is going to be some class that we create that sends out the web requests. At least that's the design that makes sense in my head. So we'll create some class, some service proxy, some service host, or a client on our machine, on our computer, on our code that's going to send those requests out. So we want to set that up, and we want to mock that out. So there's going to be a real one that sends HTTP requests, and there's going to be a mocked version of that. And we want to basically intercept that out. So looking back at the README, we can see some examples. So our request is going to be to this URL. Here's the example JSON we've got. So it's got an API key that's going to be inside the code, and then there's this future-only flag that's probably on the web API. All right, so whoever this Midwesternfreight.com is, they said, okay, if you send future-only true, we'll only give you the future shipments. We won't give you the past shipments. And then down below is some example JSON that's going to be some data coming back. So we want to mock all of this out. We want to basically make sure all this is working. So thinking through what's going to happen, we want to verify when this request, so we're going to intercept that request. We want to verify the URL, and we also want to have the ability to verify the JSON to make sure the JSON is coming back correctly. Then finally, we want to return the actual JSON object, the return object. So let's get that set up. I'm going to create just another function here. We'll say get example shipment data, and this is going to take the URL and the JSON, incoming JSON that's coming in as a part of the request. So let's just do our test real fast. So we want to say assert that the URL equals, and I'm just going to grab this out of here. So we want to make sure that URL equals that. We also want to assert that the JSON, let's get the API key, and I'm going to do something that's not correct. I'm just going to do this test API key that it generated here so we can see that the test fails, and then we'll change it to the actual one to see that it works. That way we've got a true before and after. And then finally we'll do one that is JSON, and this will be future only. And we'll just say is true. So there's our assertions as a part of our test. So we are in the test file, in the test class. We're going to be doing assertions here. And then finally, we will return our JSON. So let me just grab this out. That looks correct to me. All right, so there is our JSON object that we're going to return out. That will be the data coming back out of the web service. So now we've mocked that. This is an in-memory thing. This is something that's happening inside our code. This is not actually making it out. Now, in order to set this up, we're going to need to use a strategy pattern. We need a base class. Let's call it the, Midwestern Freight service, because this is the Midwestern train freight. So Midwestern Freight service will be the base class. And then from that, we'll have an HTTP version that'll actually send requests out. And then we'll have a mock version. that will use this intercept here. So that's the idea. So with that, I need to figure out how I'm going to create that. So I've done these several times. What I generally like to do is use an initializer. So what we'll do is we'll say Midwestern Freight Service dot, and I'm going to say set initializer. And this will be, so the initializer, let's think through what's happening here. This initializer, this class, so I'm designing as we go. This class, we're going to basically create one of these things and it's going to send the requests off. I'm going to guess that this API key is probably going to be used in every single request. The future only is probably specific to this endpoint, the scheduled routes, but the API key is probably something we need all the time. So let's assume that the API key is coming in. So my initializer then, what I'm going to do is I'm going to say this is a lambda, and in our case it's not going to be an empty lambda, it's going to be a lambda with an API key. So given some API key, what we'll do is we'll return a mocked one. So we'll say mock Midwestern Freight Service, and we're going to give it the API key. We're also going to give it this method, get example shipment data. So we're going to tell the mock Midwestern Freight Service, so the mock version of it, use this for getting the shipment data. So we're setting this up from the get-go. Now none of these objects exist. I need to create all this. Now I also want to reset this when I'm done. So let's go ahead and do that real fast. We'll do a try. Didn't everything over, we'll do a finally, and then we'll just say Midwestern Freight Service. We're going to say reset initializer. All right, so this is basically the setup for the test. Now one more thing I need to do is I need to be able to trigger this. So I'm going to do this through the application. So we'll go to our application viewer, and let's just say there's a button that's going to load these. Now you could click that or you could call a method. I'm just going to call a method for now. We'll say load train shipments from service. So this will be the trigger point that will actually do the work that's going to end up calling into this freight service. So this line 40 here, this is about setting up the back-end service so that it's ready to call and use the mock version. Line 47 is about the front end, the UI. This is simulating the click, that button click or the link click that's going to trigger all of the functionality. So this is what actually does the functionality, and this is the interception up here on line 40. So that's the idea here. So now we need to go ahead and start creating all of these objects. So let's start with the Midwestern Freight Service here. I'm going to go and create a new file. We'll just call this Midwestern Freight Services.py. We're going to put all of our classes that we need inside here around the Midwestern Freight Service. So we'll start off, I'm going to import ABC and abstract method because I know I'm going to need those. And we'll say class Midwestern Freight Service is an ABC. It's going to start helping me out here. Let me see if I like what it's taking. So set initializer, we're going to say initializer is that. Reset initializer is going to set it to none, so those are both good. We are going to need to create with an API key. It's looking pretty good. So if the initializer is not null, then we're going to return that one. Otherwise, we're going to return an HTTP Midwestern Freight Service. We'll have a def init that'll hold onto the API key. So I'm going to move this up to the top here. Static methods, and create. I like to alphabetize. All right, so we've got create, reset, and set. And then finally, we're going to fetch, schedule, let's say retrieve scheduled shipments. And actually, you know what, I'm going to come back to this. I don't want to design this beforehand. We don't necessarily need that quite yet, so I'm going to come back to what the actual method is going to be. Fields, constructor, static methods. That all looks pretty good. Abstract method, just fixing my imports. There we go. So that's looking pretty good. Now over here, we are going to need an import, so we'll just add that. We're also going to want the mock Midwestern Freight Service. So there's a couple classes we need to create, the HTTP and the mock. So let's go ahead and create those really fast. So we'll do class HTTP is a Midwestern Freight Service. We're going to call this super. We're not going to do anything quite yet. We're just going to create the class. We'll come back to this later. And then same thing on the mock Midwestern Freight Service. This constructor is going to get the on shipment data requested. I like that better. And And again, we're not doing anything yet, just setting this all up. So this is the method that's going to get called. This is this, going back, this is this get example shipment data that we're passing in. We're calling it here on shipment data requested. So when somebody requests it, this is the method we're going to call. So we'll come back to that in a little bit. So this basically sets everything up largely. Abstract method we're not using quite yet. We'll come back to that in just a moment. So this is looking pretty good. Now I need to actually start from the top down. So we need to create the load train shipments from service. Let's head into main. I've got some methods down here below. Let's see. There's our method. So we've got this refresh train shipment. So this is going to be load. So let's just put that here. Def self. And so this is going to effectively call into the train shipment scheduler and load it up. I'm not going to go too much into the exact details on the README. For now, let's just delegate it out. So we've got this train shipments module. Let's look at this. I like the train schedule. Let's just put it on the train schedule. So we're going to defer out to the train schedule and say import train shipments from service. You can call it whatever you want. So we're going to delegate this out to the train shipments class. So now in this train shipments class, we've already got this one that gets the current schedule. So it's connecting to the database and retrieving. So our new method is going to load into the database. I'm not going to do the database part today, but we'll do a static method, import. And so let's pull, let's move this up to the top. So we're going to create one of these. We're going to create it. We're going to pass in the API key. So here, the reason I'm doing it here is because we already have the connection string information in this class. So it seems like this class knows about the configuration. So I'm going to leave all this in the same place. Ideally, we'd move that configuration out to its own class, somewhere separate, but I'm going to leave it here for now. So let's grab the API key. So down below, we'll create, pass the API key. So here's our service. And now from here, what we want to do is we want to get our shipments. So we'll say shipments is service dot retrieve, load, get, request. So there's all sorts of different methods we could use. For a web service, I'm going to say, let's call it retrieve. We'll say retrieve train shipments. Is that what we want to call it? Let's go back to README. Scheduled routes. So we'll say retrieve scheduled routes. Now, I'm not going to do anything else with this for now. What we would want to do is come back later and load these shipments to the database. That's a part of the full exercise, the full application. I'm not going to do that for here because I'm hyper-focused on the web service. So this web service, we're now going to create a new method called retrieve scheduled routes on the Midwestern Freight service. So here we are in this class. We're going to create a new section for our methods. And what this is going to do, again, let's head back to the README, we're going to post to this URL with this JSON. So that's actual functionality that we want to have regardless of whether it's a mock or an HTTP. So what I'm going to end up doing is I'm going to say self.postJSON. So we're going to create an abstract method called postJSON. That'll be our interception. And to that, we're going to pass our scheduled routes. We're also going to send in the JSON that we want to send in. So let's just copy this out. I'm going to put these on a couple of lines so it's easier to read. All right, so there's that. Now the API key we have, so we'll use self.API key, so we're passing that in. This is hard-coded. This is all hard-coded. So that looks pretty good. So now what we're going to have is a post-JSON method. This is going to be an abstract method that is not going to do anything. In fact, I'm going to raise an error that basically says, hey, you can't do this. So this is an abstract method. This one shouldn't get called. The URL and JSON, this method needs to be overridden in both the HTTP version and the mock version. I'm going to do the HTTP version really fast just so you can see what that would look like. So going down here, we'll say methods, def post JSON, and this is exactly right. So let me pull this back up. We're going to use the requests package. Now requests we are going to need to install. So let's do that. pip env install, and this is requests, and this is part of the production code, so normal install. Give that a moment. You can find it. You know, there you go. All right, so it found that, and what we're going to use is just the requests module. We're going to post the URL and the JSON straight out. We'll raise if it's a status error, and then just return the response as JSON. So that's all we're doing. This is just what we would normally do. We're just this couple of lines of code we're effectively doing here inside this method. So this is all the HTTP version is doing. And that's actually going to make a real request, a real live request, if we end up using the HTTP version. The mock version, on the other hand, is going to do something a little bit different. So what we're going to do here is we're going to call the on-shipment data requested. So we're going to call that function we set up before and return whatever it's returning. So we're delegating out to whoever passed that function in, that Lambda function in. So we're basically we're setting this up to be able to be intercepted by the test. That largely looks correct. Let's go and run a test and let's see if I've missed anything. I should get a failure if everything is, and the reason I should get a failure, just to remind us, is this API key, oops, let me go to the test, this API key up here is not correct. So I should get an error on this line, but we'll see if I have another problem here. So let's run this. It's going to take a little time to actually load up the UI, and then it's going to simulate clicking that button. Okay, we do get a failure. Let's find out why we get the failure. It's on shipment, and it is actually failing on the API key, so that's excellent. So it actually managed to get all the way to this line. So it went through all the misdirection, got here and said, hey, that's not correct. So now let me copy the actual API key in. Let's paste that in. Let's run it again. And now it's passing, it's succeeded, which basically means it's not erroring out, which is exactly what we're looking for. So we have everything set up at this point to be able to use that data now. So now that everything's coming back inside my train shipments, this shipments now has data that's been mocked out from the test. It's this data here. Now, there's all sorts of things you can do. You can translate those into other objects. You can use them exactly as it is, which is basically a dictionary. However you want to do that, that's up to you. But this is the idea. So again, let's review, starting from the test side of things. What we did is we established a strategy pattern for the web service. There's a base class that represents the main functionality, so it's the Midwestern Freight service. And then there's going to be two derived classes, one for sending actual HTTP requests and one for mocking those requests so that we can validate as part of the test. We then set up the mock, and we tell it, whenever you're going to get that data, I want you to call my method up here. And in the method, we can do any assertions we want that we would typically do as a part of testing. Make sure the URL is correct, make sure some of the parameters are correct, make sure we're getting the correct data, and then returning what we actually want to happen as a part of the test. So all of that is setting that up in the strategy pattern, and then we just reset it at the end. The strategy pattern itself, I set that up in a new module, so a new py file. We've got our base class, which has most of the creation. So this is the create, the reset initializer, and set initializer. This is really all about the factory pattern itself. I'm sorry, not the factory. It is kind of a factory pattern, but it's the strategy pattern itself. So our ability to create one of these things, depending on if somebody set up an initializer, we'll use that correct one. Otherwise, we do our main functionality, which is retrieving the scheduled results with the actual values we want to do. What we are strategizing on is how we actually do the post. The HTTP version does an actual post, whereas our mock version is going to simply call in what was done. So this is the approach, and that approach works in all of the languages that we're using. You would set up a strategy pattern. So again, you have your base class. This is going to have your initialization, figure out how you're going to create one of these things. You're going to have your main method along with your abstract method. That abstract method then is going to get overridden in your two derived versions, a real one, HTTP requests, and a mock one or a test one or an in-memory one, whatever name you want to go with. That approach works very, very well for web services regardless of your programming language.